Hello, my name is Kirsten Maar. I'm a dance scholar teaching at the Free University in Berlin, and next to that, I work also as a dramaturg in the Berlin dance scene. First of all, thank you, Biliana and Zorika, and all others for this initiative, which holds us together in those times and over distances. And I have to also apologize for being this late with my thoughts, since I have to admit I felt it quite difficult being still in midst the crisis to judge and to be clear and to be differentiated about it. So I come to the first question. What is for you a culture of solidarity in these times and how can we produce it? There were a lot of small-scale projects initiated quite directly after the beginning, from neighborhood initiatives in Berlin. Even the payment for artists and freelancers worked on a quite unbureaucratic level, but with a cut in funding tools right away after. Later, festivals like Nobody Comes popped up to sustain the artists. Performances in public spaces are taking place at the moment, and all others. But at the same time, on a larger political level, there was no solidarity at all, not with the refugees at the Turkish-Greek border in Moria, nor with the financial bonds within the European Union, not for poor people, not for elderly people, not for mothers, not for women, not for the artists on the long run. So this leave no one behind is the opposite to what happens on a parallel level, where at the same moment anxiety is used to extend governmental power. That's how I perceive it at the moment. Very early in the beginning of Corona, I had to write an article about the issue of Climata, which was a format taking place at the Centrum Hungaricum in Berlin, inviting young performers from Hungary and Berlin to have 1 week of residence in the spaces and then present a work in progress and exchange about it. Climate in this larger sense meant as well the ecologies, as well as the same time our ways of being together. And I had to think of the 1960s when Buckminster Fuller, an architect and engineer, published his vision of a light, transparent dome over New York, which encapsulates and protects the city from any dangers from the outside. And that's what it looks like. He was naive and technocratic at the same time. His domes became part of the white, wealthy, hippie dropout culture, building an economical and technological growth, and at the same time destroying the last zones for indigenous people in North America. This vision of the dome and its illusion of getting immune by these technological means seemed crazy actual when we saw the numbers of infections rising in New York and other cities. But at the same time, Fuller's vision of the geodesic dome reminds of the holistic model of the kinesphere, which was developed by Rudolf von Laban in the 1920s and looks like this. And this is a model of connecting us to the world instead of separating us from our environment. It creates totally different bodies. And in this way, those two spheres remind me of the concepts of immunitas and communitas, developed by Roberto Esposito. And Munus there is given as an obligation and as a commitment to the community, which ensures a relationality and brings forward our ecologies of practice. So the next question was, what knowledge do we produce in culture and art now, and how should we produce and distribute the knowledge? I guess at the very moment it's not only about knowledge, but especially about specific experiences and the creation of experiences different from our own private living, which opens up a broader understanding of what attaches us to our surroundings and of how we create a public sphere. Seeing the corona times with all its restrictions concerning contact and proximity and response through the lens of discussions of last year on the ecological crisis, through the lens of the last weeks after the assassination of George Floyd, we have to see clearly and how all these political issues are linked to each other, and that we could only tackle them all together. Well, and then certainly we switched to all the digital formats of communication, but it's only one kind of connectivity bound to networking and an euphoria of for example, the universities to finally profiling the former lack of knowledge in digital tools. And the question of knowledge should maybe rather be, how do we know what we know? How do we learn from each other? How do we produce an ethics of knowledge? And can we develop alternative forms of learning, or again, to come back to what Isabel Stengers defines as establishing an ecologies of practice, which asks for its own conditions, its ways of mediating and producing knowledge in the cultural field beyond disciplines, within a collaborative, practice-based and diverse research methods. And ecologies of practice means as well to acknowledge different tools of knowledge and experiences. It strives to establish methodologies of belonging, which create their own tools and situations. It means also then to assemble around a thing, around the res publica, as Latour points out. And as such, creating these situations of negotiation and exchange in which new subjectivities could emerge. So the third question was what we learned from the crisis. Can we develop different post-crisis modes and conditions of art and cultural production which will allow basic sustainability and reduce the precarious position of cultural workers and artists? I was wondering, are we already in a post-crisis mode? I don't think so. I guess the crisis is not over yet. In a way, we are just in its beginnings and we start to recognize how our societies are changing, and we are amidst the troublesome thoughts of how it will further change our futures. In general, a crisis is a mode of an in-between state of transition. In medicine, it's a point of return when an illness turns to good or to the bad, to recovery or to death. But crisis and critique are also close to each other, and critiquing means to make a difference, to distribute something in a specific way. It allows for positioning oneself and to take responsibility for that issue. Corona, but also the political issues of our times, put us into the situation of a crisis with all its ambivalences, which are hard to judge, and we are put into a state which affects us, which transforms us, which moves us. And it creates a feeling of uncertainty and not knowing, but in a productive sense, since the modes of criticality operate from within and not from a safe distance. Crisis puts us into a situation of in-betweenness, where we have to question ourselves again and again, which is first of all an issue of an adequate use of language, I guess, and adequate use of gesture as well. And maybe also to ask ourselves, how do we create architectures for hospitality and negotiation? And fourth, does COVID-19 crisis brings forward the idea of a social equality, social states, and maybe universal basic income? How can that be reflected in culture and arts? I'm rather pessimistic in that sense. I rather think COVID-19 even fosters social inequality, but especially in this just starting second wave becomes evident. We are obviously not at all equal in front of what happens to us as a worldwide pandemic. And within our neoliberal societies, the loose networks are not sustainable and isolate us as individuals. So here again, it comes up to define different modes of working together and to include different communities. Maybe again with what Isabel Stengers calls the ecologies of practice, which create technologies of belonging and their own ethics and generate as a practice, which as a part of its environment creates one's own ethics and generates relations between situations and their, never neutral tools. And this could be developed within the institutions and the funding tools necessarily in creating long-term spaces which allow for continuities to decide themselves how they want to work together, and for research periods, for inclusion of the urban surroundings, and for the diversifying of the communities, especially in the field of an anti-discriminist curating. That's what I can say to that issue on a level of the culture and the arts. If that changes on a basic income and on social states, I cannot really judge from this situation at the moment. Well, and the last issue was what political and policy approaches you would foresee for the future in that field you work, or how should it be changed in future? For example, what theatre or contemporary performing arts fields or your field have learned from these times, and what political and policy approaches should be developed for its change, or how dance studies, for example, should change in the future. Well, for me, it's a question of how to create value in times of missing social exchange, since the shutdown meant the suspension of social relations and rituals. And even at this time, a temporary withdrawal didn't mean a time to rest and to rethink things. But maybe this forces us also to create conditions and connections beyond our usual daily routines and to transfer those to our institutions. That means building in or building with or building beyond institutions would mean to reinvent our ways of being together and co-working with smaller activist grassroots initiatives, for example. And then there's another level in personal writing. I realized to turn back to a much more subjective perspective in a state of uncertainty. And on this level, we should become more susceptible and aware of what we could not know. Finally, the last weeks of the Black Lives Matter movements, following the killing of George Floyd, showed us a way of rethinking our speaking and writing and the structural forms of discriminations by which our institutions are still infiltrated and structured. And that's, I guess, already a big part to start with. So if during the beginning of the COVID crisis there were paralyzing effects, where sometimes one felt sometimes like a zombie, this brings us maybe again to a different energetic level and to engage and to enable in activities to merge and to welcome different experiences. Well, and then there was an optional question. What is the future of ephemerality and materiality in the arts? Well, I never believed in the so-called ephemeral qualities of dance or performance. To me, it's rather something which very much manifests in our bodies. Even if you only participate in a relatively passive way, you're always affected and transformed. And maybe within the notion of ephemerality, there's still the quality of something which doesn't circulate as an object on the art market. But I'm rather suspicious to this argument, since our emotions are most probably already the most valuable thing to trade with. But materialities have agencies, and they are our environment. And since we are part of this environment on the same level, within an idea of ecologies, this means to neglect differently with an attention, again, to our histories and to our becoming together. Well, I guess that was all questions to answer, and thank you so much. See you soon.